In the endless galaxy of cruel battles and forgotten prisoners, there is one story that still burns brighter than all. Others the story of a broken human warrior trapped as the ultimate prize in a deadly alien arena. It begins not with triumph, but with silence and despair, because this man was once a soldier who carried honor in his heart, but now he wakes inside a cage of steel and shadows, a captive, dragged across stars and placed like a trophy in a place where death is entertainment, and survival is nearly impossible. The aliens called him the last rare beast of Earth, but to himself he felt like nothing more than a man who had already lost everything. Cage trembled as he rose from the hard ground, his body scarred his muscles, aching every breath, a reminder of battles long gone. He could not remember how many days had passed since his capture. He only remembered the moment of betrayal when his squad had fallen and he had been taken alive. They had told him he was weak. They had said humans were fragile toys to be broken before the crowd. But even in that moment of shame, something deep inside him whispered that the story was not finished yet. The sound of drums thundered above his head. The walls shook as thousands of alien voices cheered for the games. They had been promised a special show today, a rare fight, one that would not be forgotten. The guards pulled him from the cage, their weapons pressing against his back as they led him through dark tunnels. Smell of blood, sweat, and iron filled the air, and the roar of the crowd grew louder with every step. Warrior walked with his head low, feeling the weight of chains around his wrists, but in his heart, the memories of his past began to burn again. He remembered the Earth he had left behind, blue skies, the laughter of family, the faces of friends he could not save. His failures haunted him every night, and now inside this alien arena, he felt as if the universe itself was mocking him. But even in his broken state, he carried something that no alien master could take away. He carried the stubborn will of humanity, the strange fire that refuses to die even when hope is gone. The gates opened and light blinded his eyes. For the first time he saw the arena fully, a massive circle of stone and metal rising high into the sky. Thousands of creatures of every shape and size filling the stands. Their voices merged into one deafening sound, a storm of hunger for blood. At the center of the arena, he stood alone with nothing but chains hanging from his arms. The announcer, a tall alien with a voice like thunder, declared him as the ultimate prize, the rare human warrior captured from the forgotten world. They mocked his size, they mocked his thin frame compared to the beasts of their world, but laughter quickly turned into anticipation when the gates on the other side opened. A monster stepped forward, its body twice the size of the human, its skin like armor, and its eyes glowing with hunger. The crowd erupted in madness, chanting for the human's quick death. They expected a single strike to end the fight. They expected the warrior to fall like dust. But inside the human's chest, his heart began to pound with the old rhythm of war. He was broken, yes, but not yet dead. And as the beast charged forward, something inside him awakened. First impact sent him flying across the sand, his ribs burning with pain. The crowd cheered, thinking it was over. But the human forced himself back to his feet, blood on his lips but fire in his eyes. The beast attacked again, claws cutting through the air. But this time the warrior moved. He ducked, he rolled, he used speed instead of strength. His body screamed with every motion, but his mind remembered training, every drill, every moment where survival meant outthinking an enemy. The crowd gasped when he struck back, his fist small compared to the monster's claws, but aimed with precision. Each strike was not strong, but it was clever, targeting weak points, joints, eyes, soft flesh hidden beneath armor. Beast howled in rage, swinging harder, trying to crush him. But the human refused to fall. He thought of his past, the faces of those he lost, the pain of failure that had eaten his soul for years, and he turned that pain into power. He moved with desperation, not because he wanted to live, but because he refused to die. For the amusement of creatures who saw him as nothing more than a toy, minutes felt like hours. The battle painted the arena with blood, his own mixed with the beast's. The crowd, which had mocked him at first, now watched in silence every movement of the fragile Human warrior defying what they believed possible, and when at last he drove a sharp shard of broken chain into the beast's throat, and the monster collapsed, shaking the ground. The arena exploded with sound. Half of them roared with awe, the other half with fury, but all of them knew one truth. The human had done what no one expected. He had survived. The warrior stood trembling in the center of the arena, his chest heaving, his body broken, but his spirit unyielding. He looked at the thousands of alien eyes staring at him, not with laughter now, but with something else: respect, fear, curiosity. They had wanted to see a rare beast die. Instead, they had witnessed a legend begin. For the first time since his capture, the warrior felt the old fire return to his heart. He was still broken, but not defeated. He understood now that his battles were not just for his own life, but for the truth that humans, no matter how fragile, are not trophies to be owned or prey to be hunted. They are warriors and survivors. He raised his blood-stained hands to the sky, not in victory, but in defiance, and the alien arena shook with the power of human spirit. The deadly games had only begun, and the broken warrior had already changed everything. Human warrior stood in the center of the arena, his chest heavy with pain, his arms trembling from the fight he had just survived. The dead beast lay behind him, its body still bleeding into the sand. The crowd above roared in disbelief. Some shouted his name though he had not spoken it. Some cursed in anger. Some simply stared at him with fear, because they had expected a show that ended quickly. They had expected the rare human to fall in one strike. But instead he had done what no other weak species had done. He had drawn first blood in the deadliest arena of the galaxy. The guards rushed in chains, ready to drag him away. He did not fight them. His body had no strength left. He allowed them to pull him back into the tunnels. His vision blurred, but his mind burned with something new. He had lived. He had survived when no one believed he could, and even though he was still a prisoner, still broken inside, he felt a strange fire deep in his chest. The fire of hope. The crowd's voices still echoed inside the walls as they pushed him into a cell. His body collapsed against the stone floor. His ribs ached, his hands shook, and blood covered his face. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was not in the alien prison. He was back on Earth, standing on a quiet hill, watching the wind move through the grass. He saw faces of those he had lost his brothers in arms, his family, their voices calling him a protector, a fighter. He had failed them once, but here in this terrible place he felt as if their eyes were still watching, asking him to rise. Again the next day the games returned. The human was given little food and no care for his wounds. The aliens believed he would die soon from weakness. But when the gates opened again and his name was called, he stood. His body screamed with pain, but he walked forward because he knew the eyes of thousands were waiting to see if the strange human could survive again. The second battle was worse. They brought out a warrior from another world, tall with sharp blades on each arm. His skin glowed with light, his movements quick like lightning. The crowd cheered this new champion, for they believed no human could face such speed. The announcer laughed, speaking of how short the fight would be. But the human knew he could not give them what they wanted. If he died here, his spirit would die with him. If he fought with everything, then maybe, just maybe, he could prove again that humans were more than prey. The match began. The alien rushed forward, blades cutting the air. The human barely avoided the first strike, the wind of the blade slicing across his cheek. He stumbled back, his ribs burning with each breath, but he forced himself to stay standing. His enemy circled him fast, graceful, confident. The crowd shouted for blood. The alien struck again. The human blocked with his chain, but the force tore the skin from his arm. He cried out, but did not fall. He looked for weakness, remembering every lesson from his old battles. He could not match the alien in speed or strength, but he had patience. He had cunning. He let the warrior strike again and again, each time moving just enough to avoid the killing blow. The blades cut his skin, blood spilled, but he stayed alive. He waited for the moment when the alien grew too confident, when the attack left an opening. It came faster than he hoped. The alien lunged forward, both blades aimed at the human's chest. At the last second, the human rolled under the strike, his chain wrapping around the alien's leg. He pulled with all the strength left in his body, dragging the enemy down. The alien fell hard. And the crowd gasped. The human did not hesitate. He leapt forward, slamming his fists again and again into the warrior's head. His rage, his grief, his pain, all exploding in those strikes. Until at last the alien stopped moving. Silence filled the arena. Then came the roar, a sound so great the walls shook. The crowd could not believe it. The human had won again. 2 battles, 2 impossible victories. The announcer's voice shook as he called out the result. The human warrior was no longer just a prize. He was becoming something else. He was becoming a legend. The guards dragged him back to the cell, but this time they looked at him differently. Some with fear, some with respect. He collapsed again against the cold wall, but inside his chest the fire grew stronger. His wounds ached, his body screamed, but his heart whispered, "You are not done yet." He closed his eyes and saw again the faces of his lost ones. He whispered to them in silence, "I fight for you days." Past more battles came, each one harder than the last. They sent beasts with jaws of steel, warriors with weapons of fire, machines that could crush a man in seconds. Yet somehow the human endured. Each time he used not strength, but will, not size, but mind, not power, but heart. The crowd that once laughed now began to chant his name unknown. To them became a symbol of something greater. The fragile creature they thought would die had become the blood-soaked hero of the arena, but victory came with a cost. His body carried wounds that never healed. Bones cracked, skin torn, muscles torn apart. Still he refused to give in. Every night he told himself one truth: I am not their toy. I am not their prize. I am a man, I am human. And that was enough to stand again. Still in the shadows he began to hear whispers. Some of the slaves spoke of a darker truth. They said the arena had a secret. They said the ultimate prize was not freedom, but something worse. They said those who survived too long were not allowed to leave. They became property trophies, living statues kept forever as proof of alien power. The human listened and felt a cold fear, but he did not let it break him. Instead, it gave him more reason to fight, because he would never allow himself to be chained as a decoration, and so he waited for the next match. He knew the games would not stop. He knew the masters would push him further until his body could no longer stand. But he also knew something else. Every fight he won changed the crowd. Every victory turned mockery into belief. Every drop of his blood shouted a message to the galaxy: humans are not weak, humans are not prey, humans are spirit unbroken. And with each victory, he was no longer fighting just for himself, but for every soul who had ever been crushed under alien chains. As the gates opened once more and he walked into the light of the arena, his body broken, but his spirit burning, he knew the war was far from over. He was the broken warrior trapped in the deadly alien arena, but he had drawn first blood against fate itself, and now the universe was beginning to watch. The human warrior had now fought more battles than his body could remember. His skin was scarred, his bones carried pain with every step, but still he stood alive in the alien arena. The crowd that once laughed at him now cheered his name, even if they could not say it right. They no longer saw him as weak or fragile. They saw him as the rare fighter who could not be broken. But what they did not know, and what even he did not fully see yet, was that his greatest weapon was not his fists, not his chains, not even his speed. His greatest weapon was something unseen, the human spirit that no alien could understand. After the second and third victories, whispers began to spread across the city where the arena stood. The human had become a story. Slaves spoke of him in the dark corners of their cages. Guards argued about him in their resting halls. Some said he was blessed by unseen powers. Some said he carried the ghosts of his dead with him. Others feared him, thinking he was a danger to the order of the games. The masters of the arena, however, only saw profit. Each fight he survived filled the seats. Each victory made the crowd roar with greater hunger. They wanted to see how far the human could go before his body finally broke one night as he sat in his cell, his body weak and his mind filled with memories. He heard a soft voice from the shadows. Another prisoner, an alien with thin arms and tired eyes, spoke of a secret. They told him that no champion of the arena ever left alive. The prize for victory was not freedom, but slavery without end. The strongest were kept as eternal trophies, displayed in cages of gold for the masters to admire. The human listened, and his heart turned cold. He had hoped, perhaps, that if he survived long enough, he might earn release, that maybe he could escape. But now he understood that his survival was never meant to give him freedom. It was meant to trap him forever. This truth became his greatest fear, yet also his strongest reason to keep fighting, because he realized that every battle now was not only for his life, but for the chance to break the chain of lies the arena had built. The aliens thought they owned his fate. They believed his story would end as theirs demanded. But humans were not born to be trophies. Humans were not born to bow. He swore in his heart that he would never let them cage him in gold. He would rather die fighting than live as a display. The next battles pushed him harder than before. He was sent against creatures made of stone, their fists like hammers. He was sent against machines with glowing blades and endless strength. He was sent against teams of warriors fighting as one. Yet again and again he refused to fall. He used every ounce of his mind, every memory of training, every bit of cleverness that made him human. He set traps using his chains. He attacked weak spots. He endured pain that should have killed him, and rose again with blood in his mouth, but fire in his eyes. The crowd could not understand it. They had seen stronger fighters. They had seen larger beasts, but none had ever seen a warrior so broken and yet so unwilling to give in, and so he became more than entertainment. He became a symbol. Some of the slaves whispered his name like a prayer. They believed if he could fight against impossible odds, then maybe one day they too could rise. The guards watched him with unease because they felt something in him they could not name. He was not just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to defy the entire system around him. Yet his body was reaching its limit. His ribs never healed. His left arm shook from old wounds. His skin carried more scars than flesh. He knew he could not fight forever, but the spirit inside him burned stronger with each match. For every drop of blood spilled, he remembered the ones he had lost, the brothers in arms, who had fallen, the family whose faces he could still see in dreams. He fought for them now. He fought for every silent voice crushed by alien cruelty. One night, after a brutal match where he barely stood alive, he was dragged into a darker chamber, not his normal cell. The masters of the arena stood before him, tall, cold creatures with eyes that showed no mercy. They told him his survival had become dangerous. They said the crowd was beginning to see him as something more than a fighter. They said the order of the games was at risk. But instead of killing him, they gave him a new test. They promised him that the next fight would decide his fate. They called it the trial of the prize. If he survived it, he would no longer be a mere fighter. He would become the ultimate trophy, displayed forever as the champion of champions. The human listened, his body broken, his heart heavy, but his eyes burned with defiance. He understood the truth now fully. He was never meant to be free. He was meant to be an example to all species, that no matter how strong they fought, they could never escape the grip of the arena. But he was human, and humans do not accept chains. He whispered to himself in the darkness, "I am not your prize. I am not your property. I am a man, and I will show you what a man can do." The next morning the drums thundered louder than ever. The city gathered, every seat filled with voices screaming for blood. The gates opened, and the human walked out, his body shaking, but his head high. Across the arena, another gate opened, and out came not one, not two, but 5 warriors from 5 different worlds. Each armed, each trained, each stronger than him. The crowd cheered in madness. They believed at last the human story would end. But what they did not see was the unseen weapon inside his chest, the spirit that had carried him this far. As the warriors charged, he moved not with fear but with purpose. He dodged, he struck, he endured. Every hit against him hurt like fire. But he refused to fall. He used the arena itself, the sand, the walls, the weapons dropped from fallen enemies. He fought with mind and heart, not with strength. The battle was chaos, blood everywhere, screams echoing. Yet with every strike he shouted without words the truth of humanity. We do not quit, we do not bow, we do not die as slaves. When the dust settled and the last warrior lay silent, the human stood barely breathing, his body nearly broken. His blood painted the sand, but his eyes burned bright. The crowd did not cheer this time. They stared in silence because they had seen the impossible once more. The masters of the arena looked on, their faces cold, but in their eyes fear began to grow. They had wanted a prize, but instead they had created a spark of rebellion. And deep inside, the human knew this was only the beginning. He was not just fighting battles anymore. He was preparing for war. The human warrior had become more than a fighter in the alien arena. He had become a fire that could not be put out. He had defeated monsters and machines. He had beaten warriors from worlds stronger than his own, and every time he stood bleeding yet alive, the crowd saw something they could not explain. They had believed humans weak, fragile, easy to break, yet here stood a man who refused to bow. His survival was no longer entertainment. It was danger, because his victories lit sparks inside the hearts of others. In the cages beneath the arena, the slaves whispered of him every night. They spoke of how the human bled, yet never surrendered. They spoke of how he fought not with weapons, but with will. They began to believe that if one man could stand against the masters, then maybe many could rise. Together, guards began to notice the whispers. They heard the chains shaking at night as prisoners dreamed of freedom. The arena masters also noticed, and they grew uneasy. They had planned to use the human as a prize, as a golden trophy for their power, but now he was becoming something far worse. He was becoming a symbol. The human himself felt the change. He no longer thought only of his own life. He thought of the faces of those around him, the slaves with hollow eyes, the fighters forced to battle until death, the children hidden in dark cells who had never seen the sky. He felt their pain, and he carried it as his own. Each time he entered the arena, he fought not just for survival, but for every silent voice that had been crushed by chains. His body was scarred beyond recognition. His ribs never healed. His arms shook with weakness, yet his spirit grew stronger with every fight. He began to believe he was placed here for a reason, not just to survive, but to ignite something greater. One night, when the guards dragged him back to the cells, a hand reached out from the shadows. It was an older prisoner, a thin alien with chains on his wrists. He whispered that the time had come. The arena masters had built their empire on fear, but now fear was cracking because of the human. They said the people in the cages were ready to rise if only someone would lead them. The human looked into the alien's tired eyes and saw the same fire he felt inside. He nodded silently because words were not needed. He had already made his choice. The next morning, the drums thundered louder than ever. The arena had prepared a grand event. The masters wanted to break the human once and for all. They had brought out the arena's greatest champion, a beast so large it shook the ground with each step. Its jaws could crush stone. Its claws could rip metal apart. The crowd screamed for blood. They believed at last the human would fall, and the story would end. But the human did not fear. He walked into the sand not as a broken man, but as a leader with the eyes of thousands watching him. As the beast roared and charged, the human moved with speed, his body burning, yet his mind sharp. He dodged the crushing blows. He struck at weak points. He used the chains and sand to slow the monster. Every moment he fought, the crowd shouted. But among the slaves watching from the shadows, a different chant began. They whispered freedom. They whispered rise. The human felt their voices in his blood. And with one final strike, he drove a broken spear into the beast's throat. The monster collapsed, shaking the ground, and silence filled the arena. Then something happened that had never happened before. Instead of cheering, the crowd hesitated. They looked at the human standing bloody but unbroken. They looked at the fallen champion. They looked at the fire in his eyes, and a strange unease filled their hearts. Because they had seen not just victory, they had seen defiance. The guards rushed forward to drag him away, but the slaves in the cages pounded on the bars. Their voices rose louder and louder. The chant became thunder. Freedom! Freedom! The guards shouted for silence, but the noise grew until even the arena walls shook. The masters looked down from their high seats, and for the first time their faces showed fear. That night the human sat in his cell, but he was not alone. Slaves reached through the bars, whispering their plan. They spoke of secret tunnels beneath the arena. They spoke of guards who could be turned. They spoke of weapons hidden away waiting for the right moment. And they asked him to lead them because he had already shown them the way. The human looked around at their desperate faces, and though his body was weak, his spirit was strong. He told them without words, only with the fire in his eyes, that he would fight not just for himself, but for all of them. Rebellion began in silence, but grew like a storm the next day, when the drums called him to the arena. The plan was set. The human stepped onto the sand, knowing this would not be just another fight. This would be the beginning of war. The crowd screamed, expecting blood. The masters smiled, expecting control. But the human had already made his choice. He would not fight the way they wanted. Instead, he would fight for freedom. The gates opened, and the enemy stepped out, another great beast. But before the battle could begin, human turned not toward the beast, but toward the stands. Raised his broken chains into the air, his face covered in blood, and he shouted not in their language but in his own voice. A cry of defiance that echoed through the arena. The slaves answered, their chains rattling, their voices rising. Guards rushed to silence them, but the human struck first. He used his chains as weapons, attacking not the beast, but the guards who entered the sand. The arena exploded into chaos. The slaves broke free, bursting from cages, the sound of iron shattering filling the tunnels. They poured into the arena, armed with whatever they could find. The crowd screamed, some in fear, some in awe. The beast still raged in the center, but the human faced it head-on, leading the charge. The battle was no longer entertainment. It was rebellion. It was the breaking of chains. Blood filled the sand, not just from beasts and fighters, but from guards and masters. The human fought with every last ounce of strength, his body broken, but his spirit leading the way. He was the flame in the storm, the spark that had turned despair into fury. He shouted not with words, but with action, showing that freedom was worth any price. The slaves followed him, their fear gone, their chains broken. Together they turned the deadly arena into a battlefield of hope. The masters shouted commands, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of rebellion. They watched from above, their power slipping from their hands. They had tried to make a prize, but instead they had created a weapon, a human weapon, unseen yet stronger than anything they had known. The weapon of will, the weapon of spirit, the weapon of freedom. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. The human stood in the center of the storm, blood dripping his chest, rising and falling, but his eyes never looking away from the high seats where the masters stood. He knew this was only the first step. The true battle was still to come. The arena had ignited, but the war for freedom was only beginning. The arena that had once been a place of cheers and blood sport was no longer under control. The rebellion had turned it into chaos. Guards fell to the rage of slaves. Chains broke under desperate hands. The crowd screamed not with joy but with fear, and above it all the human warrior stood, leading with nothing more than will. He was broken, his body torn open, his skin painted with blood, but his spirit burned brighter than any fire. The masters looked down from their thrones, their faces pale, for they had never seen such a storm born from a single man. The great beast still raged at the center of the arena, its roars shaking the ground. It was meant to kill him, to be his final end, but now it had become part of the chaos. The human faced it, his eyes never leaving its massive form. He knew that if the beast lived, it would crush not only him, but the slaves who had just broken free. It was not just his fight, now it was their fight, it was freedom at stake. He could not fall, he had to finish it with a roar of his own. He charged, the beast swung its massive claws, shattering stone where he had stood a moment before. The human rolled his ribs, screaming in pain, but he rose again. He grabbed a broken spear from the sand, his hands slipping with blood. He circled the beast, his mind sharp, even as his body cried for rest. He remembered every battle before this one, every moment when death was one breath away, and he remembered how he had survived not by strength alone, but by refusing to quit. The beast lunged, its jaws snapping. He shoved the spear deep into its mouth, the wood splintering, but stopping the bite for one heartbeat. That heartbeat was all he needed. He leapt onto its back, chains wrapping around its throat. The beast bucked and roared, throwing him into the air, but he held tight, using every last shred of strength left in his broken body. The crowd gasped as they watched the fragile human clinging to the monster like a shadow, refusing to be thrown off. The beast slammed against walls. It rolled across the sand, but still he held on, tightening the chains, digging them deeper into its flesh. His arms shook, his vision blurred, his chest burned, but he whispered to himself one truth over and over: I am not your prize. I am not your trophy. I am human, and I fight until the end. With one final pull, he drove the chain deeper, cutting through the beast's throat until its roar turned into a choke. The creature staggered, then fell crashing into the ground, shaking the entire arena. The dust rose. The silence that followed was heavy. The human rolled off the beast, collapsing onto his knees. His body could barely move, but his eyes lifted to the sky above the arena. The slaves screamed in victory, their chains lifted. High guards fled, some fighting, some running. The rebellion was spreading like wildfire. The masters looked down, their empire crumbling before them, and for the first time fear filled their eyes. The human looked at them and raised his blood-stained hand, not in surrender, but in defiance. He had destroyed their beast. He had destroyed their control. He had destroyed their lie, but the battle was not over. Guards poured into the arena in waves, armed with blades and guns. Their orders were clear: crush the rebellion, kill the human, end the fire before it burned the whole city. The slaves rushed to meet them, weapons in hand. The arena became a war zone, screams, roars, metal against metal, blood across sand. The human stood again, his body refusing, but his spirit forcing him forward. He picked up the fallen spear and joined the fight. Each strike from him carried not just strength but meaning. He fought for every prisoner who had known only chains. He fought for every soul crushed under alien rule. He fought because humanity itself was watching through him. The masters screamed for the guards to kill him, but none could. He moved through the storm like a shadow, striking hard, vanishing, rising again. The wounds opened across his body. The slaves followed his lead, their fear gone, their courage born from his defiance. The rebellion spread beyond the arena into the city gates thrown. Open cages broken everywhere. For the first time in memory, the sound of freedom was louder than the sound of drums. Human was struck again and again, his blood marking the sand. His knees buckled, but he refused to stay down. He saw a child slave hiding near the wall, and with his last strength, he stood between the child and a guard's blade. He killed the guard and pushed the child toward the escape. His chest burned, his vision faded, but he smiled because he knew he was giving what he could, no matter the cost. He had once been broken, but now he was whole again, not in body but in spirit. Final moment came when he stood at the center of the arena, surrounded by fallen enemies. The slaves behind him, the guards ahead, and the masters above. He lifted the broken spear one last time and shouted, not in alien words, but in his own voice. A cry of freedom, a cry of humanity. The sound filled the arena, shaking every stone and every soul. For the first time, the galaxy heard the truth. Humans are not prey. Humans are not trophies. Humans are spirit unbroken. The guards hesitated. The slaves surged forward. The arena gates burst open. Freedom poured into the night sky. The masters fled, their power shattered, The human fell to his knees, his body finally giving way, but he smiled through the blood because he knew the truth. The rebellion had begun because of him, but it would not end with him. He had shown them the unseen weapon that no chains could break. He had shown them the human spirit. As dawn rose over the smoking city, the slaves stood free, their chains shattered. Some whispered his name, some carried his body, others simply looked to the sky with tears in their eyes. They knew they owed their freedom to the broken warrior, who had fought not for glory, but for them. Whether he lived or died in that moment mattered little, because his story would live forever. His spirit had lit a fire that could not be put out, and so the legend was born. The broken human warrior trapped as the ultimate prize in a deadly alien arena had refused to be a trophy. He had refused to be silent. He had chosen to fight. And in doing so, he had changed the fate of thousands. The galaxy would remember his story, not as one of weakness, but as one of strength. Not as one of defeat, but as one of defiance. Not as one of slavery, but as one of freedom. Because in the end, the greatest weapon was never his fists or his chains. It was his humanity. It was the unyielding human spirit. The end.